Game of Thrones is back, and I know a lot of you out there have been watching the new series. I haven't been watching. I used to watch the show every season, in fact, up till about series 4, 5, 6. The last episode I remember is with Daenerys in the field, surrounded by the horse dudes after she loses her dragon, I think, maybe 4 or 5 years ago. However, it is still an immensely popular series, and although I'm not watching it, I know a lot of you out there have definitely been watching the new episodes. That being said, not everybody's happy with the newest Game of Thrones series, including our friends over at W Magazine. I'm far from being the world's premier expert on magazines, women, literature, and especially not women's literature, so I had no idea what W Magazine was. I am not one of the nearly 2 million people that follow them on Facebook. Unlike, say, Mel Magazine, which I'm convinced is actually a surrealist comedy project, W Mag appears to be very real, and their problems with Game of Thrones are likewise very real too. Their article claims, quote, Game of Thrones keeps killing off entire immigrant populations, and it's a problem. It's written by Kyle Munzenreiter, a very Germanic name, whose normal beat appears to be writing about drag queens and fashion, bread and circuses, my dude. But is Kyle right? Does GOT keep killing off entire immigrant populations? And if it does, is that a problem? Is it something that needs societal intervention? In today's video, we'll look at the latest complaint from the left about a show that has otherwise drawn praise from woke Twitter for its girl power themes and sexual depravity. We'll also look at how Game of Thrones has been covered in the media. This is not the first time it's been politicized. It's also been used as part of the broader immigration narrative and the narrative surrounding racial relations in the US. All of that ahead in today's video, but first, they can't protect you from the Ice King. Was that his name? Was it Night King, Nightcrawler, Nightcall? The dude with the dagger? Yeah, whatever. They can't protect you from botching your sponsor pitch, but they can protect you online. Sign up for virtual shit. Okay, as you may guess, a show with the cultural significance of Game of Thrones has been covered in the political media before. Every mediocre liberal arts student with an inflated ego and belief that they are a master manipulator saw themselves in Littlefinger. And what career path attracts more mediocre liberal arts students with inflated egos than political journalism? The confluence of the two results in several articles every year where an extremely smart, hip, and with the times journalist tries to draw some woke message out of the show. Let's hit the main article first, and then look at the history, and I'll explain why I think the left is so upset about this. From WMagazine.com, quote, Game of Thrones keeps killing off entire immigrant populations, and it's a problem. Problematic. This article almost isn't even worth reading. It's basically the guy giving a history of how each group gets killed off in the series. There's not a whole lot here that differentiates this from a regular fan synopsis, aside from the headline, but let's take a look anyways. Quote, where it once seemed like Game of Thrones had something to say on the topic of immigration and the introduction of new populations to the staid old continent of Westeros, I'm no longer sure it's interested in such heady ideas anymore. It continues to burn up entire ethnicities, like kindling in the fire of expensive battle scenes, revealing that it only introduced them in the first place to populate its numerous bloodbaths. Entire peoples with proud, interesting histories have been given the send-off of a random redshirt cadet in Star Trek. The word staid means unadventurous and boring. All of the leaders of Westeros are depicted in the series as European people, the only possible exception being the leadership of House Martell, who may be Mediterranean, Hamitic, or Semitic, but are white-passing nonetheless. Westeros needs more diversity, claims the author, because there isn't already enough conflict, strife, division, and war. Adding entire new populations, never mind where they actually would go, is exactly what needs to happen for the betterment of all of Westeros. The author, and the left more broadly, seems to have forgotten that the entirety of human history is a series of group conflicts. If Group A wanted to come live where Group B lived throughout most of human history, the possibility of that move would be sorted out at the tip of the spear. The idea that totally alien groups, like the Dothraki and the Northmen, can live synchronistically in proximity is about as real as Daenerys' dragons. The author then laments the fate of the wildlings, killed off mostly by White Walkers and as thralls of the Night King. Quote, then there are the Unsullied. We're left to assume that at least a good chunk of them have somehow survived the long night and will fight in the upcoming Last War, but it's not entirely clear if the show has any larger plan for them outside of dudes who will die for Daenerys. Considering their unique reproductive physiologies, they aren't useful for much besides fighting and manual labor. Does this author want them to, what, start reproducing and demographically conquering Westeros? Quote, it's odd, because not only have so many outsiders died to protect the people of the Seven Kingdoms, kingdoms, but some of the most prominent characters have foreigners to thank for their skills, experiences, and magic they've learned from both Essos and the Free Folk. So it sits a bit awkwardly that there are very few free folks or immigrants from Essos left to share in the rewards and the power structure that emerges afterward. I'm no Song of Fire and Ice Game of Thrones expert, but even I know that this isn't actually at all Guy, because if in theory Daenerys wins, she would then control both Essos and Westeros. So the people from Essos that helped her would still have control in Essos, and they would be able to move over to Westeros. The entire population of Essos didn't leave to come fight for her in Westeros, just like how in every real war in real human history, the fighting age men have gone off to fight for the benefit of their country's civilians, whether it's treasure, glory, territory, or what have you. Men die in war, and a whole ton of men died in primitive medieval wars. Apparently, that fact escaped our esteemed woke author. He's perplexed by the very concept of fighting age men going off to battle, and many of them dying, all for the good or glory of their nation. He's not the only author to attempt wokeness with Game of Thrones, though. Back in 2014, 5 years ago now, Throwback Thursday, CNN published this piece, quote, "How Game of Thrones is like America." Wow. Wow, deep. You can just see the feature editor in the CNN newsroom yelling, hey John, get us something the millennials and Gen Xers will click on, because only old people read our site, and we need an ad demographic interested in more than magic boner pills and vacations to Israel. Mr. Blake's piece begins with this retch-inducing paragraph, quote, "A fire-breathing dragon has never vaporized a senator giving a pompous speech on C-SPAN. No candidate has ever poisoned a rival at his wedding reception, and no White Walker zombie has ever dragged away a screaming climate change skeptic away." I'm gonna kill myself! I'm gonna be physically ill. One of the reasons Mr. Blake gives for GOT being just like the USA is, quote, "Race still matters." He continues, quote, "Daenerys Targaryen liberates an army of black and brown slaves as she marches through a North African-like region, breaking the chains, break my rusty cage, of oppressed peoples. It's thrilling stuff. Occupy Wall Street with 3 fire-breathing dragons. Still, some critics say the plotline unwittingly resurrects a racial stereotype often used to justify U.S. imperialism. White saviors rescuing dark-skinned people from the barbarity of their ways. Whiteness is both a conquering and civilizing force in Game of Thrones, stand-up comedian Amer Rahman wrote in his blog. And who is a better expert than a stand-up comedian? British blogger Shane Thomas called Targaryen's conquests the Save the Coloreds tour. Well, bad optics there, Thomas. Saladin Ahmed, author of Throne and the Crescent Moon, said the show also reinforces some stereotypes about black and brown men in its depiction of the Dothraki people, a nomadic, brown-skinned tribe portrayed as hypersexual and hyper-violent. Even more fully drawn characters of color like Missandei, a regal woman who acts as Daenerys' translator and aide, slip into stereotypical behavior. Ahmed says. The actress who plays Missandei, Nathalie Emmanuel, is fantastic, but her character becomes a cliche at times, Ahmed says. She is the black best friend every white girl has, he says. She has no story of her own. She has no desires or wants of her own. She's just there to give advice to Daenerys. Maybe that's because it's her job. She's a servant of Daenerys. It's also tiresome. Additionally, he writes the following, quote, "The rulers have relied on a giant wall, originally built to keep White Walkers out, but now used to stop border crossings of an impoverished group the people of Westeros diminish as wildlings. The rhetoric used to justify the wall is similar to some of the language used in America's immigration debate," says some political science professor. "They say we need to make sure that they don't come here and ruin our society and culture," Weichert says. "Some people were lucky enough to be born on the right side of the border and have an interest in keeping out those who are threatening the existing order." End quote. The woke SJW left has been upset for some time at the tropes and racial canards present in Game of Thrones, really ever since the series began. The left has an insatiable urge to enforce their idea of equality in every aspect of life, especially in ridiculous circumstances like fiction and TV shows. In the show, the wall was built to prevent White Walkers, these zombie-like creatures, from attacking and destroying Westeros. Walls have been built throughout real history to defend lands and people from invasion. And yes, the nature of a barrier is that some people will be on one side and some on the other. It is in the interest of the people of Westeros to preserve their way of life and culture. The free folk tend to be more barbaric and incompatible with the way of life in any of the Seven Kingdoms. This much is evidenced in the show itself. Likewise, the free folk have an interest in maintaining their way of life, and are shown to be hostile to outsiders, to the point where they attack Jon Snow when he goes to their side of the border. Groups fight for their interests. They fight other groups in the process. Human history is a series of group conflicts, varying in size and severity and location, but from the first rock-throwing tribal wars to the most complex military contests in world history, group conflict is simply human nature. The left wants us to forget about this important part of human psychology. They want us to forget our natural urge to defend our civilization and culture against outside threats, just like they want to make it sound horrible for the people of Westeros to build a wall to defend themselves in Game of Thrones. We know the left views history through an egalitarian, equality-focused lens. It's why they accuse European Americans of genociding the Native Americans, while ignoring the numerous intra-Indian conflicts that took place for decades, if not hundreds of years. Group conflict has always been a part of the human condition, but the left is attempting to redefine history, making group conflict an invention of evil Europeans. Many Americans and Europeans feel rootless and lack an identity. They replace a real identity, based around nationality, family, or region, with consumerism. For these people, Game of Thrones is as important as the history of the West. To them, the moral decisions and racial politics of Westeros are as important as those here in the real world, which is why you see the arm-flailing, passionate, incensed coverage of the show's treatment of minorities and immigrants. All peoples need mythology through which a sense of time and place can be imparted, and for modern Americans, that mythology is Game of Thrones and Avengers movies. The telling of stories and myths has always been an important human tradition. Avengers and Game of Thrones are the commercialized, socially binding mythology of the modern time. There's nothing inherently wrong with enjoying them, of course, but it's because of their integral status to our cultural narrative that they receive so much scrutiny and analysis. Speaking of which, let me know down below what you think of my take here. Agree? Disagree? Comments? Anything? Post down below. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for a return to tradition. I'll be doing some response videos, just like the old days, here in the next couple days on this channel. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you all next time.